Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Tim Fulton. Tim, welcome.
Hey, great to be with you. Thank you, Thomas.
Great to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Tim Fulton. My firm is called Small Business Matters. It's a consulting agency that I've had now for about 20 years. My heroes are small business owners and leaders in small business, growth-minded typically. They all share issues with growth, either too much or too little. And they employ me as a coach, as a mentor, as a guide to help them towards a healthier growth.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. In our messages before the episode, the topic of conversation, or at least a proposed one, is around CEO peer groups. Mm-hmm. I was interested in the topic just because I've heard how influential your peer group can be. And mm-hmm. lots of anecdotes around, you are the, in terms of net worth, you are the average of the 5 people you hang around with. Have you heard that one?
Yes.
And I think it can make a big difference. So can you just give me a breakdown or your thoughts on the concept of peer groups and what does it mean to CEOs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Thomas, I was very fortunate. For 16 years, I served as a chair with Vistage International. Vistage is I believe, the largest CEO membership organization in the world. In the UK, I know they have a pretty good footprint in terms of members, CEOs. And so as a chair, I hosted a monthly meeting with my groups. And the groups are typically 12 to 16 members. Most of them are either CEOs or presidents or general managers. And these peer groups, what usually attracts members, my experience, is one of several things. One is, and I'm sure you've heard this from your clients, it's lonely at the top. Many CEOs do not have someone that they can talk to oftentimes. They can share the good stuff, but it's sometimes when it's not so good that they don't have a group, a mentor, someone that they can talk to, someone they can go to for advice, someone they can go to help make those tough decisions. And so that's one thing that I found attracts CEOs to a peer group is just the opportunity to talk to peers about things that we can't talk to our wives or our kids or our neighbors about. The second thing is the opportunity for growth. Most of my members, as I indicated earlier, are what would be referred to as growth-minded individuals, meaning they understand that they know just a little bit about what's available to know about running a company. And so they value the opportunity to learn from speakers, learn from other members, learn from reading books. And so they're growth-minded individuals, and they want to be around other growth-minded individuals. And maybe the third thing that I think brings people to groups like this is the opportunity to share best practices and to learn from other CEOs who are not in the same business. They're not in the same industry, but oftentimes at that level, they share many of the same issues around healthy growth, issues around finding talent, issues around finding capital to fuel their growth, issues around exit strategy. I got into this mess. How do I get out? How do I exit in a good way? And so the opportunity to learn from peers, I think they value quite a bit. The challenge for all of my members, if you surveyed them, would be time. They're all really busy. And initially, the thought of carving out a full day once a month to join other CEOs in a meeting for some seems almost impossible. How could I do that? How could I find a day a month? And yet, once they get involved, their mindset changes to where I have to do this. This is the one day a month that I get away from my office. I get away from my business. And it's the old thought, the opportunity to work on the business versus working in the business. And they find that to be extremely valuable.
So, you mentioned a few of the things which come up frequently. What would you say is the main one that you always see or you regularly see in terms of issues that you give advice over,
Mhm.
or is brought up with everyone? And what's your answer to some of that?
Well, that's a good question. I've recently wrote a book about, it's called The Meeting, and it's about a one-day peer group meeting. And in the book, I have 4 different issues that come up that I found to be very common in my meetings. One issue was with a bad employee. The term that's used frequently is a terrorist employee, one who is performing, is hitting their numbers, but is guilty of bad behavior. No one wants to work with, nobody wants to be around. And I found with a lot of my members over time, at any given time, they all had a terrorist that they were dealing with, and trying to figure out how to deal with that terrorist, because they're bringing in results. Oftentimes it's a salesperson and they're hitting their numbers. They're bringing in new clients, but they're miserable to be around, miserable to work with. And so there's that, okay, if the fear that if I let this person go, I'm going to lose sales. And yet, as long as I keep this person on, I'm losing key employees because no one wants to work with this person. And how do I deal with a terrorist? And the simple answer there is, fire the terrorist. That was all, that was easy for me to say, Thomas, you need to fire that person. And yet it was never that simple. Another common issue that I had, a number of my members had business partners. And I always loved to bring in new members with partners because I knew there would never be a shortage of issues, because there are always partner issues. It's always interesting, partners, they start in, synced up when they start the business, right? That's why they start the business together, because they have the same idea, the same vision. And yet it doesn't take long before the partners go in different directions. One wants to grow and one doesn't. One wants to add new offices and the other one doesn't. One wants to sell and the other one doesn't. And so, we were always dealing with partner issues. And when it came to a point where the partners had to split up, how does that happen? How do we negotiate a separation? Kind of like marriages, and just as 50% of or so of all marriages end up in divorce, that's true with business partnerships as well. And so, for me, it was usually not a question of if there was going to be a separation. The question was, when will these partners decide to separate? And so that was always a good issue with the group. And another one, Thomas, that came up was about growth. Not unusual that a company would be experiencing nice, healthy growth, sometimes double-digit growth, and all of a sudden that growth would stop. And not intentional, certainly, but all of a sudden it was, I can't grow this thing anymore. It's like we've hit a ceiling, and I just can't get it to the next level. We're at 5 million in revenue, and I want to get to 10, or I'm at 10 and I want to get to 20, and I just don't know how to get there. And so that was a common issue that would come to the group is, hey, how do I've taken this as far as I can, I think, how do I get this business to the next level? And again, no simple answer for that. Sometimes it was bringing in someone from the outside to as a number 2 to help stimulate growth. Sometimes bringing on strategic partner. Sometimes changing a significant change in the design of the business does it. And Thomas, what's interesting is normally the first thing is it's about people. I need to change seats. I need to move this person, or I need to remove this person. And what gets overlooked in my experience is the design of the business, because the business could easily be designed to be a $10 million company, but it's not designed to be a $20 million company, which means, okay, we're going to have to reorganize this business. We're going to have to rip up, the design that we've had and figure out how to design the business for a different level of growth. And as difficult as personnel issues is, sometimes more difficult is a complete reorganization of the business. That can be extraordinarily difficult. So those are just a couple of the common issues that would come to the groups that we would work on.
Would you mind giving me an example of changing the design of a business before and after?
That's a good one. So I had one of my members owned a pest control business, residential, mostly residential, but somewhat commercial. And he took the business over from his father. The father had run it for, I'm going to say, 20 years. It was a nice family-owned business, operating smoothly, nice margins, nice profit. But my member, my client, the son bought his father out and wanted to take it to the next level, and he wasn't quite sure how to do it. The business had been designed when a service person went out to the house, performed service, they sent a bill to the homeowner, they got paid. So it was a transactional business. And his decision was, if he was going to take it to the next level, was he needed to turn it into a subscription business so that he wasn't dependent upon each visit to collect revenue. Instead, he would bill his clients every month, whether a service person went out or not. And the service people still went out, but instead of depending upon that visit for revenue, they were getting, it was reoccurring revenue, a subscription business, which is I'm sure the valuation on a subscription business is significantly higher than that of a business that's dependent upon transactions. So over a course of about a year and a half, he took that business from a transactional business to a subscription business with solid reoccurring revenue that then he was able to scale much quicker than he would have been able to do before. So that's one example. Just one that I read about. I wish I could take credit for this, but one that I saw that was just recently here and I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, here in the States, and we have it's a very large chain of gas stations, service stations. They sell gas, convenience stores, and they've been around for quite a while. The business is called Quick Trip. Very nice in terms of service stations. And one day I was in a different part of Atlanta than I'm used to, driving by a strip shopping center, and I saw a Quick Trip with no gas pumps. I thought that's weird, because most of their revenue I know comes from selling gas. I thought, well, that's interesting. And then not long after that, I saw an article in the paper, and it was about this store they had opened up. It was a test store that they had opened up, and they asked, it was a vice president of Quick Trip, what's with the store with no gas? And his response was interesting, Thomas. He said, we're not sure how much longer cars are going to need gas, so we're testing a new model, a store without gas. And so rather than react to that change, because sooner or later it could very well happen, they've decided to begin to reorganize their business model to plan for a business that didn't sell gas. And I wish more businesses had kind of that foresight to be willing to test with a complete redesign of their business. But I think for many business owners, that's a very scary thought, to completely redesign my business. And yet I think it's almost required. One of my favorite books I read a number of years ago, it's a book called Bounce. And it looked at why some businesses, when they hit a very difficult spot in their growth, why some businesses fail and some don't. And what they found is that the businesses that don't fail when they hit a COVID environment, right? They do it because they have what they refer to as a laboratory mindset. They're always tinkering with the design of their company. And in fact, what they found, these companies that were highly resilient, every 3 to 5 years did a almost complete redesign of their own business, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Highly resilient companies, a willingness to redesign every 3 to 5 years. That's highly unusual, at least my experience.
Well, if you've got an outcome in mind, and the best way to do that is with a redesign, then it's logical to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. It is, but you're right, but it almost makes too much sense for companies that have been operating the same way for decades at a time to make a significant change. And yet you're right. if you want a different outcome, you've got to be willing to look at a different way of doing business.
Do you highlight any benefits around the peer group in terms of self-imposed limitations and setting higher goals and that sort of thing, or is it very much strategy?
Really the strategy, but I think there are other benefits, and you identified a couple. One is, these are success, at least in my case, these were successful CEOs, growth-minded, companies are growing. And so it almost set an expectation for the members of the group to set, I think, higher goals than they might have otherwise, because every month they're reporting back to their group about their KPIs, their key performance indicators. And so there's almost some intrinsic responsibility to grow your business, and maybe a little faster than you would have done otherwise. I think another one that comes to mind, Thomas, is, and I'm sure you see this with your clients, is that we all have blind spots. We all have areas within our business that we don't have quite the visibility or the clarity to that we'd like to have. And so I think my members would say that they have fewer blind spots as a result of being in a peer group like this, because when they hear another member talking about something and they say, wow, I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought of documenting all my processes. I hadn't thought about working on my exit strategy. I hadn't thought about what happens when my number one salesperson gets ill due to COVID, and how do I replace that person? And so it's recognizing some of those blind spots before we get run over, like a train, by that blind spot. So recognizing and beginning to take action on those blind spots. Those are just a couple that come to mind.
Well, the first couple that you mentioned were around problem employees, and then also potential business partner issues. And it sort of reminds me of it's sort of relationship issues in a way. So it's just people within the business, and it's, I suppose, tricky in the sense that although the owner may know the right thing to do, there's just an area of conflict there. And I suppose having that space to talk it through and get different perspectives is beneficial.
Yeah, and I always saw, part of my role as a chair of the group was to create that safe spot for CEOs where they felt comfortable bringing their most difficult issues. And Thomas, they weren't always business issues. It was not unusual that we would get personal issues coming to the group. And what we recognized over time is there's really no separation between the two, between business issues and personal issues. They're all intertwined together. And, personal issues, just a matter of time before a personal issue shows up within the business, whether it's a health issue, it's a relationship issue, it's a money issue. Sooner or later, that personal issue will almost always show up in the business. So hard to separate those two. And so, again, not unusual that members would bring those personal issues that they just felt like, I've got no one else to talk to about this, to bring it to the group where they felt like it was a safe spot. And I can't say non-judgmental, because human beings, we're wired to be judgmental, but as much as possible, avoiding judgment, as much as possible upon the other members, just knowing that, hey, one day I'm going to be the one bringing this issue to the group. And I would hope that people would reserve as much judgment as possible.
From a selfish perspective, do you find yourself learning an awful lot by being in that environment?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I've always felt that I was so fortunate, because, we would have speakers, each meeting come, speak to group experts on different topics. We would read books, and just learning from my members was invaluable. I think maybe the greatest learning experience that I could have ever had. Yeah.
And have you got any, because of recent issues, like you said, with COVID, is there anything that you've picked up from that where you think is applicable for the audience?
I guess a couple of things that I've seen over the past year. One is the idea, and I wish I could remember the author's name. I want to say Talib wrote a book called Black Swan, And the idea is that there are these events that happen that are totally outside of our control. And as much as possible, we want to be prepared for these black swan events. And certainly COVID was a black swan event that impacted everyone. And so the question for the CEO is, to what degree am I prepared for this when it happens? The second thing that comes to mind is the need for communication. And this is something that I really worked on my CEOs with, that I didn't think, particularly, starting a year or so ago, that it was possible for them to over communicate to their employees, to their clients, to their key stakeholders, communicate about, where are we and what are we doing and what aren't we doing, and how can we help each other. So the need for CEOs and leaders to over communicate, particularly in difficult times. What else did they learn? And this came from Jim Collins, the famous author, Good to Great, in his most recent book, BE 2.0. He talks about the importance of identifying within every business what he calls the brutal fact. And the brutal fact is, what's preventing this business from getting better, from getting healthier, from getting bigger? Identifying, every business has a brutal fact. And so I worked hard last year with my clients, getting them early on to identify, what is your brutal fact, particularly around COVID and how you're responding to COVID. Are you going to lose key employees? Are you going to lose key clients? Are you going to run out of cash? Are you going to go out of business? What is the brutal fact of your current reality, and how are you responding to that? And now I know what a lot of my clients are finding today is fatigue. People are tired right now. They're tired of COVID. They're tired of the pandemic. They're tired of sitting in front of screens. They're tired of Zoom meetings. And so that's the next impact of this whole pandemic is this period of exhaustion and fatigue, and how do we get through this? And the second thing that I'm finding with many of my clients now is the difficulty in finding and retaining talent, because at least here in our country, and maybe true in Europe as well, is the labor market has tightened up considerably, whether it's because people have decided they don't want to work, or they switch jobs and they don't want to switch again. But labor market's very tight. And now coming out of the COVID, employees, they were reluctant to switch jobs in 2020 because of the circumstances, but they're not as reluctant now. So it's believed that as many as 50% of all employees over the course of this year are going to be looking for a new job. And so employee retention is probably, I think, maybe the toughest issue that many companies are facing today.
Yeah, I have heard some people say about the fact that if it's the case that everyone's working from home, then if you're doing a job from home, sitting in front of your computer, you can easily switch, and there's not really much differentiation between one company and another. So
yeah, it's not like you're moving cities, or your commute is changing. Yeah, you're just dialing up to a different website every day. Yeah.
Is there anything that you think that would be of value regarding the topic of peer groups, CEO peer groups, that I haven't asked you about today?
Yeah. I think for your listeners, if they're considering a peer group, I think there's several factors. One is just to determine, hey, is this right for me? Because peer groups they're not the answer for all CEOs. And I would tell my members that up front, that this group is not for everybody. I think Vistage, we had maybe a 3% to 5% market share in the different metropolitan areas that we had groups. So that suggests there's a whole lot of CEOs that chose something else. So one, make sure it's right for you. Make sure that you have the time to devote to it, because in my case, it was a full day meeting once a month, and then some other time geared towards reading or getting together with members outside. I think a third factor to consider is one's willingness to open up. As you had referenced earlier, it's meant to be a safe place, a place where CEOs can bring their toughest issues and be vulnerable with the group. And so that's a question that I would ask, prospective members is how comfortable are you being uncomfortable? How comfortable are you being vulnerable, sharing with other CEOs? And then the last thing is having that growth mindset. There's been a lot of research about growth mindset versus fixed mindset, and not everyone has a growth mindset. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think to be in a peer group, it does require having a growth mindset, a willingness to learn, a willingness to fail, a willingness to be wrong. I think all those are really important.
What would you say to the individual who's got a terrible peer group with loads of negative people, with lots of fixed mindsets?
Yeah, get out, get out, because your time is way too valuable to be wasting it, so to speak, in a group that you're not benefiting from. And it's unfortunate, that Vistage isn't perfect. There are good groups and there are bad groups. Certainly, I'm a Vistage speaker, so I get to visit a lot of different Vistage groups when I speak, and I see all sorts of different groups. But yeah, certainly if someone is in a group that they're not happy with, that they're not getting value, number one, I would address it with the chair first. Say, hey, for whatever reason, this is not working for me at the moment. Is there something that could change? And if not, I would recommend find a different group.
What are your goals, Tim?
Wow, good question. Well, the immediate goal is I have, over the last 5 years, I have taken a sabbatical every year. I've taken a month off, and 2 of those years I have walked the El Camino Santiago, which you may be familiar is in Spain. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the El Camino. Essentially, it's a walk all the way across Spain, and I've done that twice. This year, in a couple of weeks, I'm heading to Portugal, and I'm going to do the El Camino. It starts in Lisbon and heads straight north up into Santiago, where the cathedral is. So my immediate goal is to try to get in good enough shape to walk. It's about 380 miles from Lisbon up to Santiago. My second goal is probably in the next 3 years, I'm going to transition from what I'm doing now. I semi-retired about 3 years ago. I'm going to take another step in the terms of that retirement in another 3 years to just be doing less, which means I've got to find something to take up that time, and I'm not sure what that is. So just as I tell my clients in terms of their exit, as much as you're exiting from something, make sure you have something you're exiting to. I need to figure out what that too is for me.
Interesting. Well, we've just spoken today, but I often with someone who's like productive, maybe who's got a lot of entrepreneurial stuff going on. Do you ever retire? Do you think? Are you ever gonna stop?
It's highly unlikely, because I really love what I do. I love working with entrepreneurs and business owners. My sense is maybe working towards more volunteer work, and I do some of that now, working with a couple of organizations here in Atlanta, helping new entrepreneurs, young people wanting to start their own businesses. So probably more volunteer work than I'm doing now. But yeah, you're right. I don't see that I would ever get away from it completely.
Bit more of a mentor then.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Tim, where's the best place for people to find you?
Sure. My website is smallbusinessmattersonline.com, smallbusinessmattersonline.com. Thomas, I've published 3 books. The most recent is called The Meeting. Those books are available on Amazon, if any of your listeners are interested. And my email address is very simple, timfulton@hotmail.com. If I can help any of your guests in any way, I'd be happy to do so.
Okay, well, thank you for all the value today.
Thank you for having me.